Hi, we're Mike and Cindy Jacobs with Generals International, and we're privileged to have with us on the set today Marc Nuttle. This is our second posting that we're doing on American exceptionalism and where we are in a crisis today. Mike, we're in a crisis, aren't we?
We are, and Mark, you laid out such a beautiful explanation of why the United States has been an exceptional nation. But we also know that there are threats to that exceptionalism. On the horizon right now, you've got radical Islam, but you really are a specialist in one that is really at our door. If there were tanks, like we were talking in the last session, aimed at us today, these are tanks related to the economy. And if we don't deal with that, we could cease being the kind of nation we've been in the past.
Yes, Mark is the author of A Moment of Truth, which is a very insightful book that talks about essentially where we are. He's been a political consultant around the world with nations. So, Mark, just give us a snapshot, kind of where we are. Very sobering, isn't it?
It is, it is. We find ourselves in times of trial that the good news, though, is that we have an answer for this. We still have our destiny in our control, but we have to face it truthfully. So what we're going to talk about today is really what is that threat? Is it real? Is it business as usual on how we deal with this, with the budget?
Yeah.
And I would submit that it's not. So,
yeah, remember God gave me this prophetic word, no more business as usual, almost a year before the economy shook, but we're kind of still doing business as usual, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Now, let's talk what that is. It's, in a nutshell, first, it is the debt, the national debt, the amount of debt. Now, why is that? Why, I get asked the question, why can't we just continue to borrow forever?
Or print money.
Or print money, which is what we're doing now, but particularly when interest rates are about 0.125%, as low as they've been in modern times, even in the history of the country. Why can't we continue to borrow forever? Well, there are reasons. So let's talk about it. The world has a liquidity problem in that all governments are in such debt. There isn't enough money to loan to all sovereign governments in a given year. We're coming to the point where there's not enough money to loan to all sovereign governments in a given year what they need to cash flow the extra deficit. The problems are the debt, the ongoing deficits, and the denial of our leaders to do anything about it. Saying that it's business as usual. We'll just put this off for another 3 or 4 or 5 years and take another look at it and see what it looks like we've done for the last 2 decades. So let me just run through a couple of charts.
That'd be great.
Yeah, because we're kind of at the tipping point, aren't we?
Chart 2, we'll take a look at chart 2, which is the current national debt. Current national debt is about 14.2 trillion. This was these are rounded numbers. This says 14 trillion as of September, October last year.
And where are the source for these numbers?
Thanks, Mike, for asking it. These are the United States government's numbers, and they are not in dispute. These numbers are not subject to debate. These are the official numbers. In fact, these are less now because the debt's greater than this. You hear the debate about Congress has to raise the debt ceiling in March. That's because the debt ceiling is about authorized debt ceiling is about 14.3 trillion, and we passed that before the middle of March. So these numbers are actually below where we are today. Per American, it's $45,000 per every man, woman, and child in the United States. But here's the most important point. Our structural deficit, the amount of money we're spending over what we take in each year, is 1.5 trillion. Now, how do you measure that? If you go to the bank and want to borrow money, the first thing they're going to ask you are what is your equity, your assets, and your debt? Your debt to equity. What is your solvency based upon debt to equity?
Can you pay it back?
And then you have the cash flow to pay the amount of money.
But governments also have a ratio that's looked at. And what is that ratio?
It's debt to GDP, gross domestic product. And so when you heard about Greece, that's chart 3, chart 4. When you heard about Greece, it was 120% debt to GDP. The UK, Great Britain today is 125%. And the United States is 100% debt to GDP. Our gross domestic product in 2010 was about 14 trillion, and our debt's about 14 trillion. Now, what does that mean in ability to pay? Chart 5 talks about the liquidity of the world, which is $140 trillion is the amount of money of liquid availability in all stock exchanges, commodity and bond markets. So there's ready cash to buy T-bills or to fund governments. And these would be sovereign treasuries also, like China. The total world GDP last year was $60 trillion. So roughly 15% of that is what's available to give to add debt or to buy debt for governments to deficit spend. Chart 6 points out what that is. Based upon that, that's about $6 to $9 trillion. The U.S. needs in the next 15 months is $4 trillion, Europe $2 trillion, the rest of the world, 182 nations in the World Trading Organization, so you know the size of how many countries there are, another 2 to 4 trillion, including the UN and the International Monetary Fund.
Now, how much is the U.S. part of that?
About 4 trillion. That's
wow.
That's what we need.
Wow.
Yeah, to get.
So let me ask you
to get through the stimulus package, to get through the ongoing deficit, and money that's due, that has to be redeemed in the next year or so.
Historically, have we ever been in a situation like this globally where we were bumping up against the total available like this?
In World War II, as a percent of GDP, we were high. During the Great Depression, we were high. We have never been this much in debt as an ongoing debt. And remember also, in World War II, those were not structural deficits by meaning year in and year out because of entitlements. Those were one-time expenditures to get through World War II on a year-by-year basis.
Okay. Now, what
and at the end of the war, they ended.
What's an entitlement? Excuse me.
An entitlement is a government program like Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare that you basically are entitled to year in and year out, no matter what. It's not a contingent liability. It is a fund or a service that you are able to redeem as an entitlement, and it occurs no matter what.
That's like a fixed expense in a way, almost, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's a big part of our economy, but we don't have money to really pay, do we? Isn't there a point where we can't pay these entitlements?
I'm saying we're there by about 2013. Chart 7 points out the world's problem, the world's ability to fund more debt sometime before 2013 crosses 100% of debt to GDP. The pressure this puts on other markets like the stock exchanges, and the reason I point out the liquidity of the world, all stock exchanges, commodities, and bond markets, if you take the money out of those to fund sovereign debt, then those indexes go down. It puts pressure on those indexes and your currency. Another important point, Cindy and Mike, is that right now, as I mentioned, the interest on the debt is about 1.25%. The historical average for interest for capital since 1850 has been 4%.
This is even for nations.
No, particularly for nations.
Yeah.
And what you try to do when you're doing monetary policy is turn the dials so you keep it at about 4%, control inflation, the bank can make some money, you pay about 6% and everything works. At 4%, if we just hit which sounds like a low rate right now, the cost of the debt would go up $600 billion. And so there's a catch-22. You can't have a growing economy without cost of capital. It's a cause and effect. The only reason it's so cheap right now is because we're coming out of a recession, we hope, and there's not a demand for the capital, and there aren't good loans to make, so low demand keeps interest rates down.
Yeah.
Now, if the economy starts to grow, it has to go to 4%. Capital is not free, and you can't just print it. What happens when you print capital is you debase your currency. Chart 11 talks to your point, though, Mike, about total debt, private, federal, and corporate, is now 360% of GDP. At our height, the worst it has ever been in 1933 was a little less than 300%. So you see what we're up against on this deficit. Now, what this means is that we are rapidly coming to the point, if we continue to spend like this, where the debt is so large and the interest on the debt is so large that you can't tax at 100% enough to pay it. Then your only option is to cut back dramatically, which would be traumatic to the economy, or print it, as you say. And if you print the money, then when I say debases the currency, you go into hyperinflation. And we're about to get to the point where those choices are all we have. They're not planning properly for it. And the last thing I would say about this is that Milton Friedman, who I had the undeserved privilege to travel with at one time, said, just remember one thing as you're trying to figure all this out. If the king in the Middle Ages, who had control of all the lands, all the rents, had serfs and slaves, his word was law and could print the money, couldn't borrow and spend his way out of trouble, what makes you think the government can do it today?
So what does this mean to us? Well, there reaches a point where all of these things begin to crater, and the economic systems that we know just simply cannot function. People cannot pay. You cannot pay for the different services they need. So, you know, here's a dire picture that we have painted, and we're going to come back in just a moment, you know, and we'll do posting 3 of this and tell you what we can do about it.